A previously well-loved professor started to sour his image in front of his students
When the
after
teacher
derailing
showed up to
class again and
school,
again
this
to
is
talk about his
crazy.
obsession with Las Vegas and to hit on female students. While it has become more and more common for students in the United States to take
I
out their
heard the
hatred
story
on
about that
schools, it
kid
isn't
too.
often that a professor will do the same. I think we've all had at least one professor or teacher throughout our lives that couldn't really stick to the coursework and instead spent the class period rambling on about their personal life.
Yep,
What's much
had a few
less
of them.
common is that professor ends up becoming a rage-fueled maniac, dead set on carrying out some sort of attack against his associates. Why, though, you might ask, and for that, let's start back at the beginning. Anthony James Polito, who went by Tony, was born in 1956. Born and raised in North Carolina, he would live there for most of his life. Little is known about his childhood, but we do know that he worked for East Carolina University from 1992 to 1994.
Okay.
Working as a professor of business, this would be the beginning of his long career working at various universities throughout the U.S. During his stint at the university, he was arrested on a charge of computer trespass in Virginia, which is
Mm.
an accusation similar to a charge of hacking. Leaving ECU after 2 years of work, he then worked at the University of Georgia until 1999. He then worked for 1 semester at Brenau University before working at the University of Northern Iowa until 2001. Then, finally, he went back to work for East Carolina University for the next 16 years as a tenured associate professor in the Department of Marketing and Supply Chain Management. All throughout his tenure at ECU in Greenville, Tony was actually well known as a popular, albeit strange professor. While like any professor out there, he had some students who didn't quite like him here and there, he was very well liked for the most part. Part of what made Tony so strange was how lax his classes really were. He didn't take attendance, didn't require the students to buy the textbook, and didn't give many tests.
Mm.
Instead of using
What
his
W
university
teacher?
email address or some sort of a system within the university, Tony preferred his students to contact him through his personal website and email. One of Tony's students who attended his class, called Introduction to Operations Management, Paul Whittington, later spoke of how these classes played out. He said that the whole first month of the class consisted entirely of talking about the syllabus. After that, Tony preferred to use each class to tell the students stories about his favorite topic on Earth, Las Vegas. Tony was an absolute fiend for anything Vegas, having dozens and dozens of stories about his time on the Strip and out in the desert to tell his students day in and day out. Paul, saying that the class was the most unconventional that he had ever attended, later said, "I think he went at the end of every semester, so at least twice a year. He would talk about all the hotels that he stayed in, all the restaurants he would go to, all the clubs and shopping places he would go to, maybe
Mm.
some friends that he had made, people he went to visit when he was out
Renegades
there.
in love with
That
Las
was the
Vegas, man.
class. If you could imagine a college class where you just relive someone's vacation, like, that was kind of his class. It was all we talked about from the start of the class to the end of it." This wasn't an outlier for that particular class either. Some of his other previous students have reiterated very much of the same, with another who attended his marketing class saying, "He would talk about going to Vegas all the time. He would give us students, like, pointers on when to go, areas to stay, things like that." Other students said that, over time, Tony came to demand perfection of his students. For
Mm.
instance, if a student was asked to print out some documents for him, they would be heavily criticized if the print was misaligned even slightly, being ordered to start them all over from square one. In 2011, there was a
Okay.
shooting scare on campus, and due to that, the whole place went into lockdown for a while. However, it was only a misunderstanding. It turns out that what somebody had reported to be a gun turned out to be nothing more than an umbrella in the end. Shortly
Mm.
after, Tony demonstrated his lack of ability to read the room when he gifted some of his students an umbrella as a joke. Women in Tony's classes tended to have a fairly different experience than the men, if they were hot, that is. One woman who began to attend his classes ran into him on the elevator by coincidence before they formally met in the classroom. This led to an excited conversation on Tony's part and something of an intern position for the woman. Tony started to go above and beyond to help her with whatever she needed. During one point when he was helping her with her resume, she began to feel that his intentions weren't so pure, saying, "I initially brought my resume and my cover letters and stuff, like just for him to review, but it slowly became apparent that it was not as innocent." From that point onward, Tony would continue to contact the woman every single day for the entire semester, either through email or by phone or by text. He started bringing her gifts, and by the end of the semester invited her to his usual end-of-semester Las Vegas trip. Feeling very uncomfortable, she declined the offer and began to distance herself. Tony started to develop a new obsession, and that was reviews that his students would leave about him. Not only were there the usual end-of-term professor reviews that a lot of universities give out, but the website Rate My Professor had also been growing in popularity. Tony would take the majority of the positive reviews from that website and upload them to his own personal website as well. Not content with only posting them on his website, he would obsessively bring up the reviews during class time as well, often presenting them to the students as a badge of honor and awkwardly asking the students to discuss their thoughts on them. However, while Tony did enjoy talking about the positive reviews, he took much more of an obsession with the negative ones. None of the negative reviews were that particularly scathing, with one reading, "Funny teacher but extremely disorganized. Tell students about real-life experiences to help you understand better. We'll tell stories for the first few months, but then we'll give multiple tests in the last month based off the textbook." Still though, Tony couldn't handle receiving a bad review of any sort. He would do his best to figure out which of his students had left these negative anonymous reviews by heavily analyzing their writings and any past interactions they may have had together. He would often make comments about these negative reviews in class and openly point out which students he thought had left them. Tony had grown fairly active on social media as well, with most of his writings predictably revolving around Las Vegas, the state of Nevada in general, and various conspiracy theories he believed in. He was also more than happy to brag about his self-proclaimed 160 IQ and boast of his membership in Mensa International. On his YouTube channel, he only posted 3 videos, all of which were room tours of Las Vegas hotels. He followed a few channels, those being of political commentators, Vegas travel blogs, and porn stars. Rather than on social media, though, he would often focus more on his personal website. The website looked like something straight out of 1998, being mostly a plain text wall of various links on one single page. All over the page, his ego seeps through, with much of the content consisting of brags in one way or another. While his website seemed to have originally been intended to serve as a resume of sorts, it quickly evolved into something quite different. The resume-style section at the top of the page came to be completely dwarfed by the massive pool of pages listed underneath. He featured links to anything he found interesting in any capacity. A lot were related to his field, the news, and shopping. Of course, many of the links involved travel and Las Vegas. He had a whole section dedicated to shaving supplies and another for cufflinks. One section was entirely dedicated to, as he titled it, "Powerful Organizations Bent on Global Domination." This was a list of what most people consider to be just that. The Skull and Bones, Bohemian Grove, the Illuminati, and more. All in all, a very basic list of average conspiracy theories. More interesting, though, was the section in which he claimed to solve many of the world's mysteries himself. For instance, he claimed that he had solved the mystery of the Zodiac Killer and proved his identity. He also believed that he knew what happened with Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 and claimed to have figured out the identity of what he called the mysterious skyscrapers in Las Vegas. He also seemed to take a keen interest in the 2001 anthrax attacks, in which many envelopes containing the dangerous white powder were sent to various people throughout the United States. In addition to links, Tony wrote quite a bit of the content on the website himself. On one page called Statement of Instructional Philosophy, he rants about universities and how they work. He wrote, "There is political turf fighting, ignoble actions, pettiness, insularity. These halls are best reserved not for those short in moral character, but for those who intend to mold it." Of course, as previously mentioned, Tony's positive student reviews were listed near the top of the page. This positivity wouldn't outweigh what would happen next during his classes, though. One woman was attending Tony's business course at ECU in 2016 when things quickly started to go downhill. Much like the other female students before her, Tony quickly took an interest in her. One day she was in class, Tony felt that her boobs were looking particularly magical. He walked up to her and told her that if she wore a shirt that showed that much cleavage for the rest of the semester, she'd get an A for sure. She, along with the other students in the room that heard what he said, were appalled and pretty grossed out. She reported the whole thing to the university administration. After that, Tony never returned to class. He resigned from his teaching job at ECU completely on January 17th, 2017. With his long stint at ECU now over, he wasn't feeling as dejected as you might assume. On the contrary, he felt that this would be the perfect time to do what he had always wanted to do, move to Las Vegas. He did just that, and upon moving to the Vegas area, Tony started working at Roseman University of Health Sciences, a private 4-year school in Henderson in 2018. He would go on to work there for the next few years, seemingly enjoying his time there as an adjunct professor of business. However, he would be struck with grief when the school abruptly decided to discontinue their MBA program, leaving him without a job. He was let go in June of 2022. This quick and anticlimactic termination would haunt him for the rest of his life. Tony would never get over it. In fact, his rage regarding the incident only continued to grow over time. Desperate to stay in the Vegas area, Tony started applying to be a professor at all sorts of schools throughout Nevada. One of these schools was the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, UNLV for short.
When a teacher shoot up
This
the
application,
school.
though, along with all the others he sent, were completely unsuccessful. Tony's anger continued to grow. He began to plot carrying out his revenge in one way or another, but he wasn't quite sure on how he would do it. It seems that by July 2022, though, he started to formulate a plan. He went out and bought himself a handgun. From that point onward, he would buy some more supplies for his gun little by little over time, like magazines and a whole load of ammunition. Tony started to prepare a list of his targets. This list consisted of anyone that he wanted revenge against, mainly people that he had met through work over the years. Many of them were his colleagues from East Carolina University. Some were his rival professors, and others were some high-up faculty members that he felt were giving him trouble. On November 5th, 2023, Tony pulled up to the UNLV campus in his car and parked somewhere in the parking lot, scoping out the school. It isn't known why Tony had decided that of all the schools he applied to, UNLV would be a prime target for his revenge, especially considering that most people on his target list were back at ECU over half a continent away. UNLV was far from the only school that he had applied to that had rejected his application. For whatever reason, though, he decided that he would make this school the site of his revenge plan. By December, Tony was really left at the end of his rope. You might think that a man in his late 60s who worked as a professor for over 25 years would have probably saved up quite a bit of money to coast on for probably the rest of his life, but that was not the case. Tony was running completely dry on funds. Not only had he received an eviction notice, but he was also $75,000 in debt to various different credit card companies.
Damn.
Not only that, but Tony had failed to develop any sort of social life in the area, talking to virtually nobody outside of the swinger and sugar daddy websites he would use to try and find women. Every once in a while, he would pay for a prostitute to come visit him at his house, where he had a closet full of outfits that he had prepared for them to wear, but he didn't seem to know anyone in the city in any meaningful capacity. Tony decided that he would write letters to everyone he hated in his personal life. This wasn't something he only did to let off steam, as he fully intended to send the letters. He sent them to over 40 people throughout the country, with many of them containing personal messages as to why he hated the person so much. The contents of the letters were very angry to say the least, and more or less explain much of Tony's motivations. Throughout the letters, he seemed completely obsessed with his IQ, using it to either show off or insult any other associates. Despite having lost everything else in his life, at least he could say he was smart, he felt. Ironically though, while doing so, he both used terrible grammar and spelling, making it hard to even understand his point at times. One letter read, "You arrogant, preppy, rich, spoil-ass, smart-mouthed scold, you post incomplete on me 160 IQ UGA PhD student in seminar just to make him beg you for the grade." Another said, "Me 160 IQ already with UG degree in statistics. Some master's classes in stats also." With another yet reading, "You wreck career and life of genius doctor 160 IQ and ethical professor praised by several thousand of..."
Bro, nigga, we get it. You have a 160 IQ, bro. We get it. Why? He said that shit in every letter that he had. 160 IQ, but can't. Bro, the nigga can't write for shit. Grammar is all fucked up. You would have thought like the nigga can write a little bit, but nah, he can't write for shit.
"With your pile of paperwork lies."
Hey, bro.
And another saying, "You run national advertisements, say you need instructor of management. Then you ignore all the highly qualified faculty from across the country. Dr. 160 IQ apply.
Bro, how many times you gonna bring this shit up?"
Tony's hatred for his associates was very real. Many of the letters were nothing more than profanity and insults without much specific substance. One in particular read, "Your shit-for-brains, ununionized, third-tier dean frat boy Stan Eakins and his crew at ECU criminally forced about 18 tenured faculty of age to abandon their tenure using straight-up lying paperwork and lying students and threats to destroy their healthcare by firing them, just so he could go window shopping for new faculty that might do more useless research to please you fucks at AACSB."
Damn.
In some of the letters, he referenced violent urges he had in the past, such as when he wrote to one associate, "Here's the big fuck you that you earned over the 17 years you constantly victimized and targeted me and abused me, you evil, psycho-medicated weasel." You just damn lucky I had the decency to leave town instead of coming to your house to settle up our business. Toward the end of the letters, he made a much more general message about his grievances. As you can see from these few examples above, 99+% of higher education, once a noble of endeavors, has morphed into an absolute corrupt scam, a massive sewer where average people with zero moral compass, amoral grifters, compose themselves as expert professors and valuable administrators, and do little while collecting a lifetime shitload of salary and fat benefits with almost no chance of ever being fired. Faculty, staff, administrators all care nothing about students or education, despite all their cover claiming so loudly that they do. The ultimate attitude in universities about students typically they paid their fees so they get their Bs. Almost 90% of all undergraduate students get either an A or a B in their class, even though C is supposed to be the average grade. So mommy and daddy and student can all peacock and strut that they got above average grades and look up to the institution their entire lifetimes. Universities and colleges have become the ultimate grift, advertising what they offer as a 4-year, 5-star vacation resort for undergraduates, instead of advertising what ought to be a demanding intellectual experience that improves students and society. Boasting a tax-free status, while raking in tons of tuition borrowed from naive students who will never be able to pay it back, donations from brainwashed alumni as well as, in the case of private elite institutions, from well-intentioned but gullible people of wealth, and, in the case of public institutions, a shitload of taxpayer money. All of it is used to endlessly and expand the cushy and grossly overpaid power bases and facilities of their mediocre faculties, staffs, and administrators. Rather than end the letters on that note, something that a lot of people could probably agree with, he made a bizarre play instead. Instead of end on his major motivations, he decided to end the letters on a rant about Geico Insurance. It seems that at some point Tony had wrecked his car and the company had refused to pay the full amount to have the car repaired. He wrote, "Geico doesn't pay claims. I just parked my wrecked car by a major intersection and put a sign on it that says just that, so you will lose thousands of customers." Tony went out and mailed all of the letters, most of which were in generic greeting cards made for birthdays or anniversaries. Using his interest in anthrax, he decided to include some sort of white powder in the envelopes. While whatever he used was later deemed to be harmless, it definitely gave those who opened it a bit of a scare. In yet another bizarre move, Tony decided to upload the contents of these letters to his personal website as well. Under a link called Content of Envelopes, anyone out there was able to download a PDF file containing all of the letters he had sent to all of these different people. However, likely realizing that this would probably get him reported to the police before he was even able to carry out any sort of attack, he quietly deleted the download link later with no explanation. And then came the day. On December 6, 2023, Tony Polito pulled up to the UNLV campus at around 11:30 a.m. He made his way over to the Frank and Estella Beam Hall, one of the main instructional buildings for the school and notably the primary building for their business program. With finals coming up, many of the students were outdoors socializing while their professors were inside preparing for the upcoming exams. Tony, meanwhile, was approaching in a long dark coat with a Taurus 9mm handgun and 11 fully loaded magazines in his pockets. Tony walked inside the building and made his way up to the 4th floor. This is where he pulled out his gun and started shooting wildly. An alarm started to sound all throughout the building, with many students frantically screaming that there was a man with a gun. Students and teachers locked themselves into classrooms and offices as Tony made his way through the 4th, 3rd, and then 2nd floors of the building, shooting at anyone he came across. Many of the students reported hearing flurries of gunshots followed by screams of pain all throughout the building. Many people in the building, at least a dozen, made calls to the police as the school itself posted a message to Twitter saying that the police were on their way, warning students at the Beam Hall to evacuate to a safe area if they were able. 15 minutes after Tony first parked his car at the school, the police were on their way to Beam Hall. Only 1 minute after the original call was placed, at least one officer was on scene. The police made their way into the building and quickly came across Tony, calmly walking through in his long coat. The police, though, having no description of the killer, thought that the 67-year-old man was likely only a bystander. They shouted at him from a second-story balcony, telling him to get out of the area. Tony said nothing as he began to quickly walk towards the door, leaving the building. By this point, Tony had shot and killed 3 people in the building, as well as wounded 1 other. He left the building at 11:55 a.m., but he wasn't done just yet. He started making his way to the student union, very likely hoping to kill as many students as he could. However, this was when the police outside realized that he was the shooter. They chased Tony down as he pulled his gun on them. He shot and wounded 2 police officers as they returned fire on him. Tony was shot 6 times, being hit in the leg, the elbow, the stomach, chest, neck, and finally directly in the face.
Damn.
Tony died on the spot. With Tony out of the picture, the police then assembled a few teams together to search the building for victims or possibly more shooters. They had to force their way into many of the rooms where students and teachers had barricaded the doors. It wasn't long before they came across the 3 victims that Tony had shot. These 3 were Patricia Navarro Valles and Che-John Jerry Chong, 2 business school professors who had been present at the time, and an associate professor named Nakao Takemaru, who taught Japanese studies. The wounded victim was found as well, only said to have been a 38-year-old visiting professor with critical injuries. Luckily, he was treated at the hospital and came to survive the attack. The 2 police officers injured in the shootout were treated at the hospital as well. The police were able to determine that Tony had burned through at least 2 of the full magazines that he had brought to school, with 9 of them still being found on his person. They took his body in for an autopsy where it was found that he had a significant amount of oxycodone in his system at the time, along with a load of erectile dysfunction medication. The police came across Tony's target lists, which he had brought into the school. None of the victims that day were actually on his list, given that most of them still worked at ECU, making it a mystery as to why he even took the list with him in the first place. UNLV set up a reunification center in the North Hall of the Las Vegas Convention Center and set up an emergency hotline. Classes were canceled for the rest of the week, and the subject of whether or not to even hold finals was discussed. It was soon announced that finals would be canceled after all. The nearby College of Southern Nevada also closed its campuses as well. Highways were shut down in order to allow first responders into the area. The Harry Reid International Airport was even shut down for a brief period of time due to possible security threats.
Damn.
The 2 police officers who got into the shootout with Tony, Detective Nathaniel Drum and Officer Damian Garcia, were later hailed as heroes by the police chief during a conference around the attack. Meanwhile, the FBI and the ATF were called in to assist the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department in the investigation. The police pulled up to Tony's apartment and announced over a loudspeaker that they would be entering, not knowing if anyone was still inside. They threw 2 flashbangs into the room before storming in. Luckily, they found that nobody was there. They did find Tony's eviction notice, as well as a lot more ammunition. The detectives were a bit bewildered when they came across all of the dresses that Tony kept for prostitutes in his closet, citing their vast quantity as being of interest. Tony also had a lot of sex tapes of these encounters, with the police saying that it wasn't clear if the women had consented to being recorded. It later came to appear that they likely hadn't, as they found numerous instructions on how to install spy cameras. They took several of his computers and extra hard drives. At the same time, many of the letters Tony sent were being discovered across the country. On dozens of his devices, they found files about UNLV along with his failed job applications and maps of Beam Hall. They also found a good amount of folders with information about the faculty, mainly from news articles and public records. One of the folders, called Devil Bosses, contained information about the people he felt had likely denied his application. The police soon came across a chair with an arrow taped to it. This arrow was pointing downward towards a document lying in the seat, something that the police said was basically Tony's last will and testament. At first, the police weren't quite sure as to what Tony's motives for the attack were, but it became more clear fairly quickly once the letters came to light. The police said, based on interviews, Polito's perceived superiority and dissatisfaction with the lack of appreciation for his talents were likely aggravating factors. Those closest to him noted his frustration with his lack of employment in Las Vegas. Paul Whittington, the student who had previously attended Tony's classes at ECU and spoke of his time there, said that once he heard a former teacher from ECU carried out a shooting in Las Vegas, he immediately knew who it must be. He said, "My immediate reaction was it had to be Tony Polito. I didn't say that because I thought he was capable of anything like that. I didn't say that because I thought that's the kind of person he was. I said that because my entire time in class he was obsessed with Las Vegas." The mayor of Las Vegas at the time, Carolyn Goodman, said that the shooting was tragic and heartbreaking. A few senators, Jackie Rosen and Catherine Cortez Masto, urged their constituents to avoid going to the area. After the shooting, the Vegas Golden Knights team held a moment of silence before starting their match against the St. Louis Blues at the T-Mobile Arena. They continued to honor the victims for a few more matches as well, even wearing t-shirts with their names at various events. Because of the shooting, the National Finals Rodeo canceled their kickoff and held a moment of silence during their next match as well. The Las Vegas Raiders followed suit, doing very much the same. Shortly after the attack, LinkedIn memorialized Tony Polito's page. It isn't known who or why the decision was made to do so. After a load of backlash, they swiftly deleted his page entirely.
Mm.
Now, Tony is mainly remembered by his students as the oddball professor who hit on girls, bragged about his Vegas trips, and snapped after being fired. His previously positive
That's
student reviews have
crazy.
definitely been tainted over time by the knowledge of what he did. Over time, many of his students have remembered more and more behavior that they feel in hindsight at the time they should have felt was more suspicious. Tony likely paid in advance for his website to remain online for quite some time, as it is still up to view in full even 2 years after the shooting. It
Wow.
seems that he wanted his legacy to live on in one way or another, likely feeling that he would be remembered as some sort of fascinating, intimidating figure. He didn't expect that most people would only be looking into him out of morbid curiosity simply due to the fact that he was so strange.
You just don't hear about teachers showing up to school, bro. That's insane, bro. That's crazy, bro. That's crazy.